Game Day on Gamecock Central Radio. Welcome in, everybody. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell getting ready for South Carolina and Florida today. Noon kickoff in the Swamp. And I tell you what, Wes, both teams dealing with injuries right now. The Gamecocks banged up at running back, and looks like Bryson Allen Williams might not be able to go today as well. And Florida's dealing with some injuries as well.
Yeah, South Carolina in a tough situation. Obviously, injuries piling up at Ole Miss last week. Will Muschamp hasn't completely ruled out Bryson Allen Williams, but just from the tone he used in his call-in show on Thursday, described Bryce Allen Williams as being hopeful at best. He said he didn't want to use the word doubtful because there was too much negativity in the world right now. So, but that that's certainly a situation where it didn't sound too good based on the tone for Bryson to be able to play Saturday. And I think that's a big loss for them. He's been, to me, one of the guys they've used very, very well, particularly on third downs and trying to get him loose in the pass rush. I think I've always thought this staff does a really good job when they get into those third and long situations of putting something together to get a rusher free. And Bryson's a guy that a lot of times on those third downs you see number 4 sort of burying in on the quarterback. So if he really can't go, which it didn't sound good, then that hurts South Carolina. Danny Pinnell will have to go there. And really, they've been banged up across the board. Obviously, Jemias Williams now out for the year at safety. Javon Charleston out for the year at safety. That means R.J. Roderick will make his first career start at safety alongside Stephen Montag. Banged up at defensive end as well with Aaron Sterling still dealing with a knee. I think you'd probably say he's doubtful for Saturday, although they said it's not a long-term serious injury, which is obviously good news. And then on the offensive side, they get Dennis Daly back. They get Malik Young back, 2 offensive tackles who have been banged up. Tyson Williams is going to play despite having a broken bone in his hand. And then Rico Daddle, it sounded like, I don't know what the word he would use. He went through practice but was limited in practice. So I think it's probably going to be one of those things that will just depend on maybe how he feels on Saturday morning as far as his availability. But Tyson Williams expected to play. Then, of course, A.J. Turner, Mon Denson, those guys are going to be leaned on a lot, I think, this week.
Yeah, you would have to think so. And I tell you what, Mon Denson has done a fantastic job here in recent weeks. How about last Saturday, Wes? 12 carries, 120 yards, and that huge 70-yard run that set up the Gamecocks' go-ahead touchdown, and that helped Carolina win the ball game last week against Ole Miss.
Yeah, it did. And, I think it's a good point, Emerson. You if you're going to be a good football program, and I don't even say football team, I think a good program, you've got to have a Mon Denson, an A.J. Turner, a Malik Young, and the reason I lump those guys together is that they've worked hard, they're talented kids, and they really haven't played a whole lot, but they have not let that affect their enthusiasm. I was very impressed with Malik Young's comments last week when he was getting the start, basically about how he wants to be able to help this football team any way he can. And then you look and he gets injured. I hated it for him. He got injured against Ole Miss when really he was getting an opportunity with Dennis Daly out, and then he had to come out of the game. And then you look at guys like Mon Denson who have had limited carries during their career, but has been ready. He had big carries last year against Tennessee as well up in Knoxville when he was counted on. Has that huge 69-yard run last week against Ole Miss. A.J. Turner, too, at running back. This is a guy, when we talk about the running backs, we almost always talk about Rico Daddle and Tyson Williams. But I swear, every time A.J. Turner gets the ball, he brings something to the table. So, to me, you got to have guys like that aren't your marquee top players, but still bust their tails, still push everybody else, and then they're ready when they're called upon. So, some of those guys will get their chance in Gainesville.
So Rico Dowdle, would certainly be missed if he's not able to go, but we feel like the Gamecocks are in pretty good shape at running back. Mon Denson has played extremely well last couple of weeks. A.J. Turner in there as well, and Tyson Williams playing with that broken bone in his hand. Wes, Florida's dealing with some injuries as well, and they had a real scare at quarterback this week, and it looks like Felipe Franks will start for the Gators again today.
Yeah, it does look like that, and Franks is a guy that frankly, has struggled a little bit here of late. They pulled him last week against Missouri, and I know that there was a possible Georgia hangover, I guess, for the Gators, but I mean, who expected from Missouri just to go in there and really just control Florida the way that they did? I know I didn't expect that, and I would expect a different Florida team this week. But it seems like that fan base has sort of given up on Franks a little bit, and I think a lot of people wanted to see what Kyle Trask could maybe do. I know he came in relief of Franks and moved the football a bit last week, and then suffers a foot injury that ends his season this week in practice. And so it looks like Franks, and this is the guy, you look at him physically, has all the tools. Big kid, he can move around when he has to. He can make, as they say, all the throws down the field. Has a huge arm. I remember him letting go a ball last year at Williams-Brice that I swear it went 65 yards in the air. And, this kid is a former 4-star guy on Rivals, number 3 pro-style country in his number 3 pro-style quarterback in the country in his class, I should say, which was 2016 class, number 57 nationally. He has all the tools, but as we've seen, that doesn't always matter at the quarterback position. You've got to develop. You've got to, put it all together. And so far, Felipe Franks has not been able to do that. And the Gamecocks hope that it's not this week that he does.
I think the prevailing sentiment is that Franks has had ample time to show what he can do, and he just hasn't gotten the job done for the most part, even though Florida, was they were having a good year until the last 2 weeks. They lost handily against Georgia in the cocktail party, and they really got boat raced at home by Missouri, like you talked about, Wes. So Franks was 9 of 22 with 2 interceptions before giving way to Kyle Trask with about 5 minutes left in the third quarter last Saturday. And Trask came on, completed 10 of 18 passes for 126 yards and a touchdown. He moved the football against the Missouri defense that is not very good, but Florida struggled all day last week. West lost to Missouri 38-17.
Yeah, they did. And, we have this Pro Football Focus access these days, and that stuff sort of gives you a deeper dive into the statistics and situational statistics. And Will Helms has his Florida preview up right now on the front page of Gamecock Central. And one thing that caught my eye is just how bad Franks has been as far as downfield passing goes. Will did the numbers here, and the last 2 games, Franks is averaging 4.4 yards per attempt. So the football is not getting down the field. Franks completes only 39.8% of his passes that are over 10 yards this entire season, whereas he completes 78% of his passes that are less than 10 yards. So most of what he's doing is underneath, and I think you look at this South Carolina secondary and the injuries that have happened there, and the fact you do have a true freshman making his first career start in R.J. Roderick. If you're Florida, in theory, I would think you would love to test the secondary down the field. But they just haven't really shown they can consistently do that with Franks at quarterback. So that'll be something to see there. And, and as much as we have talked about the injuries, South Carolina still has its top 4 cornerbacks available. They still have Stephen Montack at safety. So really, as much as that position has been hit with injuries, they're really lucky that they did have some depth there in the first place, because if they had been hit like this last year, I mean, I think you look at the secondary last year, they were playing like 6 guys total, the entire season. That would have been devastating. So the fact that they do have some of these guys that have, at least been, I don't know if they've been ready, but they've responded when they've been thrown into the fire. So it hasn't been quite as devastating as it possibly could have been there.
Muschamp said the Gamecocks were going 6 or 7 deep at the safety position by the end of that Ole Miss game last week. Wes, he really praised the team for winning the fourth quarter last week. And, it was those kids, the young people that came in at safety that helped win that ball game on Saturday.
They did, and I always go back and rewatch the games with my Tell the Tape feature I do. And, the difference in the fourth quarter by this defense was just, night and day. And, they asked Muschamp what was different, and he said, played a little more man coverage, brought some more pressures a little more often, and they did play more man coverage. But even when they were playing zone, the team just played better. It's kind of hard to describe. Guys stepped up and made plays. The number of guys that I counted that just made game-changing type plays in the fourth quarter when really the defense made very few of those plays throughout the rest of the game was crazy. T.J. Brunson, who, he had a number of tackles in the game already, but I counted like 4 plays in the fourth quarter alone that T.J. Brunson did something spectacular on. Basically, he was involved in 2 sacks and 2 other pressures. You had Rashad Fenton with a breakup down the field, Israel McQuamu with great coverage down the field, Stephen Montack with a tackle for loss, Javon Kinlaw with a sack, Rick Sandage with a sack, J.C. Horn with the breakup there at the very end on that final play. So, you took a defense that just wasn't making plays throughout that game and actually had given up, Emerson, they gave up 18 explosive plays in the first 3 quarters of that game and then gave up 16 total yards and 0 explosive plays in the fourth quarter, which is insane. So I thought they really just sort of fed off of each other. I thought that they played with more confidence, and they just made plays, though. You had guys who stepped up when it mattered, and I think that's a sign of a program that knows how to go win close games.
Gamecock Central's Game Day podcast here. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. Glad to have you along. Noon kickoff today for the Gamecocks and the Gators in Gainesville. Wes, Jake Bentley played arguably his best game as a Gamecock against Ole Miss on Saturday, a game that South Carolina trailed by 10 points in the fourth quarter and came back to win. And Bentley was 22 of 32 passing for 363 yards and 2 touchdown passes. He did not throw an interception, and he scored the game-winning touchdown on a short run late in the ball game.
Yeah, man, I thought he was outstanding, honestly. And, when they got down by 10, nobody panicked on that sideline. I thought it was interesting looking back. They were down 10, and their first 3 offensive plays after going down 10 were 3 straight running plays, which really told me the mindset was that, this game is nowhere near over. They stuck to their offensive game plan, and were able to go make plays. But Jake Bentley, he was fantastic. Like you said, 22 of 32. 2 of those were actually drops. So if you adjust his completion percentage there, he was 24 of 32 if you take out the 2 drops. And then, I was looking through some of the other stats. He had 37 dropbacks in the game if you count both his passes and scrambles and sacks and all that, add them all together. And this, I think, says something about the offensive line as well. But of 37 dropbacks, Bentley had no pressure on him on 27 of those dropbacks. And wait for this one. On the 25 passes that he had no pressure, Jake Bentley was 21 of 25 for 342 yards and 2 touchdowns. And also that's where the 2 drops were as well. So he was accurate on 24 of 25 passes when he didn't have pressure on him, and was accurate on 14 of 16 passes when Ole Miss did not blitz him, also including the 2 drops. So when there was no pressure on Jake Bentley, which was most of the day thanks to his offensive line, he absolutely ripped Ole Miss's secondary, and I don't think we can expect that in this game because you're facing a much better Florida defense, much better secondary. Those passing windows are going to be a lot smaller. I think Florida will play a lot of man coverage on the outside against the Gamecocks. But again, this game comes down to Jake Bentley as well. I'm not expecting 350 yards passing, but he's going to have to complete some big plays down the field. I was looking back at last year's game. I had kind of forgotten. South Carolina not only was without Deebo Samuel in that game, but they lost Shi Smith early on. He had a big catch and came out injured against Florida. So the Florida DBs, that game was pretty close at Williams-Brice. The Florida DBs are really able to shut down South Carolina's receivers. They struggled to get separation, I thought, but that was without Deebo, without Shi Smith, and I think that's a big matchup is can these Carolina receivers get some separation and give Jake Bentley a chance against this Florida secondary.
Noon kick today for South Carolina and Florida in the Swamp, and the Gamecocks come in 5-3 overall. Florida 6-3 overall. Both teams 4-3 in Southeastern Conference play. So just like last year, Wes, the Gamecocks and Gators in the final game of the SEC slate, playing for a place in the final SEC standings.
Yeah, they are. And, this is a chance for further progress as a program to finish above 500 in the SEC again, to get another win over Florida. I was looking, I distinctly remember, South Carolina going for their first overall win, against Florida, in SEC play and trying to win in the Swamp for the first time ever. And, even though this Florida program, I think obviously the last decade has been ahead of South Carolina. They've won some SEC East titles. They've won the SEC. Not that long ago that they were the national champions, So this program obviously has been better than South Carolina. But, dude, you look at the last decade or so, South Carolina has held their own against Florida. They've won 5 of the last 8 against Florida. It was unheard of for South Carolina to beat Florida about 15 years ago. So I think the progress is there, and anytime you can beat this team, anytime you can go into the Swamp and win, it's a big deal for the South Carolina program. And with assuming that South Carolina is going to beat Chattanooga, and if they beat Akron, a win this week, I think, puts them on pace again for another 8-win regular season with a chance at 9 in the bowl game. So that may not be what the Carolina faithful had hoped for in their wildest dreams, when we were talking SEC East potentially preseason, but it still shows that the program is building a solid foundation to then try and recruit to and get even better players.
Wes, the Gamecocks at 5-3. Like you said, we figure they beat Chattanooga next week. That will put them at 6 wins. So this Florida game becomes very important today. A chance to get to 7 wins before the Clemson game, and there's a big difference between 6 and 7. Wes.
Yeah, there is. There always is, and I still think that Clemson game will be very, very tough to win. So you look at this one though, and a chance to sort of break through, and really they've continued at the pace that they were at last year during the regular season. They've beaten the teams that they beat last year. Obviously, they played Coastal instead of NC State. They played Ole Miss instead of Arkansas. But they've beaten the teams they beat last year. They've lost to the teams that they lost last year. Obviously, they beat Florida last year. So to continue the same pace they were on last year, and then maybe win a bowl game too along the way, they need to beat Florida. And I think it's an opportunity because this Florida team, it just doesn't. They don't feel the same as they did, 3 or 4 weeks ago when we were all really talking about Florida as the surprise team in the East. Since that big win over LSU, they haven't really looked great. And even, a Vandy team that I thought South Carolina just handled up and down the field, Florida had to come from behind to win that game. Vandy had them on the ropes early on. So this Florida team has not really played too consistently the last, I don't know, would you say month or so, I guess.
Yeah, right. For the Gators, they lost to Kentucky at home, but then they reeled off 5 consecutive wins, a couple of ranked opponents they beat during that stretch. They won at Mississippi State, and they beat LSU at home. But then things just kind of seemed to come unravel the last couple of weeks, West. I don't think anybody was shocked that they were beaten by Georgia, but Georgia beat them handily. They physically whipped Florida. And then for the Gators, you could call it a hangover if you like, but whatever the case, Florida just got whipped at home by Missouri last Saturday. And like you said to open the podcast today, I don't think anybody saw that coming.
No, I certainly didn't. And then, to go back to what we started with, I think it goes back to quarterback play, man. If your quarterback does not play well, you're always going to be limited offensively. You're not going to be able to put together the type of offense that you need to consistently go score points. And, South Carolina certainly needs for Felipe Franks to continue to struggle. If that happens, then you're probably talking about another close football game and one that South Carolina's going to have every chance to win. I don't think, a noon kickoff, I don't think you're going to have that typical crowd that you traditionally expect from the Swamp. I think we all remember how fantastic of an atmosphere that place can have when Florida's really playing well, but their fan base is frustrated right now. They're frustrated with the offense. They're frustrated with quarterback play from what I've read online. And I think that again plays into it because, I remember some of those early Spurrier years. I was in the stadium in 2006 when Florida blocked that field goal to win that game. And that's one of the loudest I've ever heard a stadium, and I don't think they quite have that swamp home field advantage right now that they did have traditionally.
All right, Wes, the Gamecocks were 1-2 in SEC play. They lost to Georgia to open things up, and then won at Vanderbilt. Gamecock offense played extremely well, but then the next week, 24-10 loss at Kentucky. But since then, the Gamecocks have won 3 of 4 in league play and a chance to get to 5-3 in the Southeastern Conference to close things out. In league play, Georgia will win the East, Kentucky will finish second, and the winner of this Florida-Georgia game, the winner of this Florida-South Carolina game will finish third. So, Wes, not the kind of season I think the Gamecock fans had hoped for. We talked about an opportunity maybe to win the East this year, and Georgia came into Columbia and just proved early in the season that they were superior. So, third-place finish would not be bad, and a chance to get to 6, 7, or 8 wins. With a bowl win, another bowl trip in the offing this year, a pretty good year for year 3 of the Will Muschamp era.
Yeah, and I think, like I said earlier, Emerson, it's about continuing to build a foundation. You want for the norm to be that you're in bowl games. You want for the norm to be that you're competing in the East, even if you're not winning it, that you're right there. You're not one of these bottom teams. I think the key to taking the next step, which is obviously to actually winning a championship or competing for a championship, where you're going to Atlanta, you can't get there, I don't think, until you've built that foundation first. And I think prospects want to go somewhere where they can win. They want to go win championships, obviously, but it's way easier to recruit off of back-to-back 8 or 9 win seasons than it is to recruit off of a 3-win season and then a 6-win season with a bowl loss. So all these things are important for the grand perception of where the South Carolina program is right now.
Florida, 6.5-point favorite today in the Swamp. Noon kickoff. Wes, final thoughts on the ball game today?
Like I said, I think it's on the shoulders of Jake Bentley. You look at Florida's defense, and their run D has not been outstanding. I think they're 80th or so in the country. So South Carolina should at least have some level of success in the running game. But you look at the fact they've been banged up there. You look at to me, the running game has been a bit up and down. It's been there sometimes. It hasn't others. Even against Ole Miss, the numbers look good, but part of that was the huge play from Myron Denson. Otherwise, I thought the running game wasn't quite what it needed to be against Ole Miss, and they had to rely on the passing game. So I think this game comes down to, keeping Felipe Franks uncomfortable on the defensive side. Don't let him find any rhythm. Keep him off his mark like he was last week. And then Jake Bentley this week, again, can he continue? I thought he's played 2 of the best games of his career in back-to-back weeks. I think he's at a very, very confident position right now. Keep him there. Start fast, and good things should happen to the Gamecocks, because I really think they can take this Florida crowd out of this game early on if they can start fast like they did last week against Ole Miss. So, but when it comes down to it, Carolina receivers find some separation. Jake Bentley put the ball in tight windows. If that happens, then the Gamecocks will be bowl eligible on Saturday afternoon with a win over Florida.
Got to wonder how amped up this Florida crowd will be in the Swamp today. 2 straight losses in the noon kickoff. A lot of problems for Florida here in the last couple of weeks, and they were in the top 10 in the country West. They were talking about trying to get in the college football playoff picture going into that Georgia game, but the season has just kind of unraveled for them the last couple of weeks. So noon kickoff on ESPN today for the Gamecocks and the Gators. We got Vanderbilt at Missouri also at noon today on the SEC Network. Ole Miss is at Texas A&M. That's also a noon kickoff on CBS. 3:30 kick today for Mississippi State at Alabama. That's the national TV game on CBS. And 3:30 kick as well for Kentucky at Tennessee. Kentucky's ranked 11th in the country. They're 7-2 overall. They are 5-2 in the league. Kentucky about a 4.5-point favorite in Knoxville today. And tonight on ESPN, 7 o'clock kickoff for Auburn at Georgia. Auburn's ranked 24th. Georgia is number 5. And it'll be 7:30 kickoff for LSU and Arkansas. Auburn, Georgia's on ESPN, and the LSU-Arkansas game is on the SEC Network. So, Wes, thoughts on the SEC here? How about that Bama shutout of LSU on Saturday night?
Man, that I watched most of that game and just sort of, I guess, solidified what we thought. I think this Alabama team is so good, man. We've seen Alabama be great on defense, and we've seen them be very, very good, sometimes great on offense. But to see an Alabama defense with an elite quarterback and an elite offense, I don't know who can beat them, man. I mean, we'll see. But as long as Tua is healthy, as long as he's playing, I don't see how anybody can match up. And actually, I know some people like stuff like this, Emerson. I saw, and I hope this poster was correct, but I saw somebody sent me today that that Vegas did a thing where they said, what would the Buffalo Bills be favored by over Alabama? And the number was actually 28.5. But if you gave me that versus Buffalo, I may take the Crimson Tide, my man. So this team, and I know college football, every time that we sort of count a champion before they get there, and it seems like, we talked about that Southern Cal team that I distinctly remember ESPN talking about where that Southern Cal team that ultimately lost to Texas, where they were as far as like an all-time team goes. Every time we crown a champion before they win it, it seems like college football reminds us that the games still have to be played, that there's still room for upsets, that anything can happen when you're talking about 18 to 23-year-old kids. So I say that fully knowing this, but it's going to be really, really hard for anybody to beat this Alabama squad.
No doubt about that. Boy, Bama had been winning really with offense all year, and what did they do? Night game at Baton Rouge, they shut LSU out, 29-0. Big win for Bama last week in that national showdown between the Crimson Tide and the Bayou Bengals. So Bama's got Mississippi State today, and there's talk about, Saban's this week talked about he has talked about avoiding the hangover. So Bama's still a 24-point favorite at home today against the 16th-ranked team in the country, Mississippi State. Wes, we're ready to go here. Gamecocks and Gators.
Yes, sir. Let's do it, and then we'll talk about it all next week on the next week's Game Day podcast. I appreciate it, Emerson.
I appreciate you, Wes. That's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is the Gamecock Central Game Day podcast. Thanks for being with us, and enjoy the ball game, friends.